Sounds great. And Jen, we'll go ahead and get started, and people will float in, and like we normally do, we'll post this online. We have a podcast recording of this. Liz will do an edited version, but it's cool. We're in the Apple Store. That's a highlight of 2021 already. Pretty cool. But Jen Park, welcome. Thank you for participating with us and coming to be a part of our community show. It's probably a little bit more Wayne's World than it is the Joe Rogan podcast or Sidewalk Lab or something like that. But hey, you make it better by being here, and we really appreciate it. For everybody who is not familiar, we're really pleased to have Jen Park here, and our work has crossed paths with her throughout her work with What Works Cities, which we will get into during the show today. We first had the pleasure of meeting Jen in person as a part of the TomTom Foundation's, I think it's like the City Rising component of their overall festival in Charlottesville, Virginia, several years ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
So true. And we've been enamored with the work that you're doing around data to improve people's lives ever since. And anyway, very, very pleased to have you with us, and look forward to the chance to talk with you today. So Jen, we start things off with some softball questions. There's no pressure here, but we're a reading community, and there's so much to be learned. So we're curious what you're currently reading or listening to. You could go physical book, podcast, ebook, take your choice of medium.
Thanks, Chris. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate. I'm thrilled to be able to kind of talk to you and also the ResourceX network. I know, and you know, that I've been a huge fan of your work and the work that you've been doing with cities for a long time now. I tend to stick with fiction. It's nice to get lost in the stories of fictional characters. So I love a good novel. And I just recently read a novel called If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. She's a Korean-American writer, and the novel was about women in South Korea figuring out their lives in a world that's very much defined by high standards of beauty and social and gender hierarchy. It was a nice escape from our day-to-day to be able to kind of place myself into these characters out in South Korea and kind of see how they're living their lives in this book.
Wow. So this is fiction? This is a work of fiction?
Yep. Once in a while, I'll pick up a really good nonfiction. For example, Barack Obama's new memoir, but I really enjoy kind of character development and like being able to kind of dive into these fictional stories. And so most of the books that I read are all kind of novels and fiction.
It's important to take a step outside of the nonfiction world from time to time. We'll be posting that on our site as well. Thank you for the book recommendation. That's awesome. I'm curious. We'll jump around a little bit in the questions that we had initially sent over. You work with What Works Cities. I would love it if you could talk a little bit about what is What Works Cities, and also what was your path to arrive there?
Sure. So What Works Cities is a Bloomberg Philanthropies initiative. We were launched in April of 2015. And our goal and mission is to partner with local governments across the country to really improve, ultimately, the lives of their residents by helping government better leverage data and evidence effectively to tackle pressing challenges like homelessness, affordable housing, and also quality of life challenges like sanitation. Our program and our initiative is comprised of 4 partner organizations. So I am with Results for America, but we also work in partnership with the Center for Government Excellence at Johns Hopkins University, the Government Performance Lab at Harvard Kennedy School, and the Behavioral Insights team. they're all national organizations that hold significant expertise in specific areas that make up our model, which is supporting cities with things like data management, strategic planning, performance, evaluation, and contracting, just to name a few. So I have the honor of being a part of the What Works Cities team before we launched in April of 2015, and worked with my colleagues and partners to really build the initiative. And in the last 6 years, nearly 6 years, we've now partnered with hundreds of cities to help support data-driven decision-making. A few years into What Works Cities, I led the launch of What Works Cities certification, which I know we'll go into. But it's the National Standard of Excellence for Data-Driven, Well-Managed Local Government. And I continue to provide strategic direction for the program. And then most recently, I worked on the launch of the new City Budgeting for Equity and Recovery program. I came to What Works Cities in a windy path. So I started my career in healthcare. I went to med school out in California and really saw the structural challenges and inequities built into the healthcare system. And so took a gap year and said to myself, what else can I do and where can we see real impact? And so I worked in campaigns and in advocacy and really understood the value and power of grassroots organizing. And that led me to a really wonderful organization called Echo and Green that provides seed funding to social entrepreneurs and early stage social enterprises. And so I got to see firsthand how individuals come up with ideas to help solve for some really big challenges in their communities and then scale up an organization to be able to effectively do that. And across all of the work that I've done, it's been very much focused on structural challenges and systems change. I think it's really important that we solve for the root causes, and really, even if it's kind of mundane, being able to think about how to re-engineer systems and structures brings me a lot of joy. And What Works Cities is exactly that. It acknowledges the importance of the work that the public sector is doing, and it really does focus on long-term systems transformation and ultimately the outcomes that we want to see most immediately for residents, but also as we're thinking about the long-term outcomes and population outcomes for residents across the country.
I had no idea. Throughout all of our conversations, I didn't know you came from healthcare, and at least had some of that background and in the seed funding work that you had talked about. And it makes sense. I mean, it's part of the same system to provide for, a good life for people. So that's totally fascinating. Thanks for sharing your story.
Sure. I think, Chris, one thing that's really interesting that I found in the last decade plus of my professional career is that the public sector has so much power and influence, and ultimately are accountable and responsible for so many people. And so to make sure that the ability that we have to partner with government to help them in either a small or very large way think about how they can improve their own systems and structures really gets to what I think is most important, which is how government is set up to serve all of their residents. Whereas when we did a lot of the social enterprise work, there were target populations or specific neighborhoods that it was focused on. The government has that responsibility to take a much wider stance and really think about the role that they play in providing the best services and the best quality of life, not just for one population or one neighborhood, or for the entire region that they're responsible for.
And that it's powerful what you're saying. It's what has attracted us. That here's an entity that's in the right business, the business that we're attracted to, improving people's lives. And they also have substantial workforce, human resources, and monetary, fiscal resources to aim at the outcomes that we seek. It's a wonderful, and they're filled with people who got into public service with such great drive and vision and heart. It's a tremendous space to work in. You can have tremendous impact, which is a word that you used that we talk a lot about. And it leads me to another general question was, what about working with cities inspires you? We talked a little bit about this already.
I'm sure you and I have very similar inspiration, especially in our work with cities, but it has to be the people, right? I am constantly inspired by the individuals we get to work with, and it really is a true privilege to get to learn from them, from the individuals who make kind of their city better on a regular basis. We've worked with thousands of individuals across hundreds of cities, and they have great stories of what's working, what's not working. They're really innovative, and they're very impact focused. And it really inspires me to take a step back and say, like, what is the full picture? What is the impact that I want to make in the world? What can I learn from these folks who on a daily basis are thinking about both long-term strategies, but like the immediate need of making sure that they're effectively delivering services on a regular basis. And so I am constantly inspired by the individuals that I get to talk to on a regular basis, whose job it is to make residents' lives better in the cities that they're working in.
Jen, did you ever grow up or come across the game SimCity?
I did, but I have to be honest with you, I've never played it, so I only know of it.
What? It was inspiration, and I thought I was going to ask how different our lives and paths might have been if it was titled Sim County. Would that have made a difference? Would there be a What Works Counties? And anyway, but you've heard of the game, not played it. I would recommend it. I think it would be right up your alley.
Well, it will take me down, I'm sure, a path that I will just continue to. It's going to be a very long. I have to dedicate hours to play it, I hear. So
after you have exhausted yourself of fiction reads, and you're like, man, I don't know where to go to next, masterclass or video games, SimCity at least should be a contender.
All
right,
good.
very cool. I want to shift into data from cities and what's inspiring you and the mission of your work to something that's, you've mentioned is very much at the heart of What Works Cities work. And I want you to tell us a little bit about your experience with the evolution of cities, developing and applying data for the benefit of our people.
Sure. When we first launched our program, we knew of kind of the cities that were excelling in the use of data and building that culture that's foundational to be able to leverage data to make decisions. And they continue to be examples for other cities. But ultimately at their core, we're working with organizations and enterprises. Cities have a much greater reach than other organizations. As I mentioned, they are far more complex, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's an enterprise and an organization that's run by individuals. And as we know, as individuals who work in organizations, culture kind of drives much of how an organization operates, including kind of the mindset and skills of people who work in that organization. And we need to work on organizational culture. And I think that's kind of the biggest evolution that I've seen, and what I think actually What Works Cities does best, which is help city leaders really build an organizational culture around making decisions and operating from a place where data and evidence are primary tools of governance. Mm-hmm. And like any other organization, it's really, really difficult. It requires like commitment, buy-in, staffing, like upskilling, professional development. And what we've seen is that when you actually provide those opportunities for city leaders, you can see tremendous growth in kind of the work that they are doing, both internally and externally, within their city government and with their residents as well. And so, we've seen cities start with an open data portal, but really think about new engagement strategies to shift the way that data is being shared and leveraged by residents and community partners. We've seen how taking procurement from a back office function to something that is a strategic asset to a city government can really transform not only outcomes for residents, but also partnership with your community and how everyone's working towards the same goals and same outcomes. And so, the biggest growth and the evolution that I've seen is this like grounding of a data-driven culture, something that's really, really difficult, but at the same time, cities are willing and wanting to like break down the silos, find the right people to do this work, test and fail, bring new innovation, and understand how data and evidence can play kind of a driving force in being able to, make smarter choices about how dollars are spent, think about equity in a different way, and then ultimately figure out how to best bring their stakeholders, their residents to the table to make decisions together and have kind of a shared accountability and vision towards kind of what they want their city to look like.
As you describe that, I have an emotional reaction. It's like, yes, I'm leaning in towards your description because it resonates with the world that we're trying to create as well. And I'm curious, from your experience, you talked about some of your cities willing and wanting. Do you get the sense that there's a yearning for this type of culture to exist with the clients you work with, or do you see a mixed bag?
I think there is definitely a yearning. When we launched our initiative in 2015, we had over 110 cities immediately raise their hand and say, I want to do this. And our network and community continues to grow with more and more cities saying, like, I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part of this network. I want to learn from the experts that you have within the initiative, but also from the other cities in the community. Because I think one thing, one value that we bring is this much larger network of cities that have tried and sometimes failed, and sometimes it has worked, new strategies around data and evidence that has really made some both internal and external impact within city government. And so being able to connect individuals with one another from different cities to be able to share those learnings and insights is really important. There's always naysayers. There are people who are like, I don't understand why we need to build the capacity of teams to collect and analyze data, or why we need to have an evaluation component to our budgeting process. But I do think we've seen city leaders like stand up and say, this is the value of it. And these are both the short-term wins and the long-term wins of being able to use data as one of the many kind of tools that government leaders should have to be able to make decisions effectively and meaningfully for their residents. And so it's definitely not the end all, right? Like, we're not saying like only use data to make decisions, but I think cities understand that and also see the value of it, and therefore are constantly thinking about ways that they can partner with one another and with organizations like ours to be able to leverage and understand and build the capacity to use data in a meaningful way so that they can build the culture internally, but also see the outcomes that they want to see for their residents.
Man, and related, are you seeing in the evolution of the cultures that you're working with, a moment of transcendence, of ownership is what I'm trying to get at, where maybe they yearn for it, maybe they start to get some practice like with anything, and then it becomes who they are? Is that part of the evolution that you're seeing?
Yeah, some of I think my colleagues and I are so excited when we find out that someone is being promoted to a chief data officer role, or a city that has never had an innovation office decides that they're going to set one up. And so we're starting to see ownership, which is a huge component of like sustainability, and also the importance of having this as a core component of the fabric and foundation of city government. And so, in the last 6 years, we've seen new positions pop up. We've seen really innovative partnership with academia, with their residents, to be able to kind of bring and elevate the importance of data in decision making. And it is the individuals within city government who are going to take the risk and say, like, we haven't done this before. We're going to try a couple pilots. I'm going to ask you to participate in a couple trainings and work with our partners at What Works Cities. And because of that, we've seen more and more within city government understand the importance of it and the value it brings to their day-to-day operations, and therefore see individuals elevated into these great roles where they're actually being able to inform enterprise-wide strategy versus kind of just their department or their specific projects that they're working on.
It's exciting. I love hearing that that's the direction that you're seeing. I mean, it's not easy, and there is a transition, and there's a culture change that takes place, but it's inspiring, and I can feel your enthusiasm when you start to see the flywheel, so to speak, get moving, and that's really wonderful. This leads naturally to, you seem to have used data as a catalyst, maybe, for the types of cultural changes and decision making that it leads to better outcomes. And then you went on to like a steroid level to get to the certification of how to use data. And I'd love to talk about the inspiration behind that program, and dive into certification for a little bit, about the successes that cities are seeing through their participation in it.
Mm-hmm. The first 3 years of our work was really focused on supporting 100 mid-sized cities. And so we partnered with 100 of them and provided technical assistance and capacity building support to these mid-sized cities. And the program really grew out of the learnings and the lessons from that work with our pilot 100 cities that we've worked with. And city leaders would come back to us and say, like, great, like this technical assistance was incredibly valuable, and we're just starting to get moving on this. What should I do next? Like, what are the steps that I need to take to continue to build this culture that we're talking about, and also build the skills that we need to be able to do this at an enterprise level? And so certification was designed with the understanding that city leaders needed the tactical steps and also needed a clear picture of like where they're excelling and where there's room to grow. It's also very much designed with the understanding that building foundational data practices is not easy, but critical, essential, and really fundamental for problem solving. And so we wanted to take something that felt very overwhelming and large and break it down to very tactical steps or criteria if you're looking at the certification work on like what cities can do next. And so there are two parts of this program. What I think is the most beneficial component of certification is the What Works Cities assessment, which provides a very clear understanding of what's working, what's not working, and where there are opportunities to improve in your data and evidence practices. And so that when a city submits their assessment, they receive a customized report with light benchmarking data, but more importantly, with recommended next steps that are tied to the resources that What Works Cities offers, such as courses that are hosted at our partners at GovX, sprints, and in some cases, technical assistance support. We also use this as a way to connect city leaders with other city leaders who may have done this work just in the most recent 6 months, and you have an opportunity to learn from them as well. And so I think that's probably the most important piece of it, is that like every city that gets to that submits an assessment has a better picture of where and how they can move forward in this kind of long data-driven decision-making journey. To date, though, the second part of the program is the actual recognition of cities that are doing this well. I feel like we have, there aren't enough moments where we can celebrate the big wins that cities are making around this culture change and data-driven decision-making. And so it's really important for us to celebrate cities that are achieving certification. We know it's a really, really high bar, but we're excited to see kind of more and more cities making progress towards it and being able to showcase to other cities and to their residents that this is important to us and this is how it's impacting kind of the programs and services that we deliver. And this is why we're going to continue to work on data. some of our certified cities have put the certification report on their open data portal and said like, hey, residents, this is kind of what Work Cities is telling us where we're excelling and where we're not. Tell us new ideas or partner with us on how we can advance some of the other places where things are not working as well. And so it's really an important, in my opinion, an important program and a tool for government leaders to be able to use to build that buy-in and to change culture internally, but also think about ways that they can continue to move on this very exciting, but at times challenging, like data journey that cities are on.
Has it, thank you for this. This is definitely juicy territory. I know Marcy Hosman is a councilwoman who's on the line from the Salt Lake City metro area. And she is also in her career is all about evidence-based decision-making. And that's what attracted her even to some of our specific work in priority-based budgeting. Jen, we're very interested in how did you arrive at how to assess the criteria? Has that seen some evolution in tinkering with, you can imagine, here's what it takes to become a civil engineer. And you need to make sure that house doesn't fall down if you design it a certain way. You're taking on something that is, you're kind of inventing what it means to be a data-driven decision maker. And I'd love to talk about your own journey in settling in on the assessment and the evaluation criteria.
Sure. It was in partnership with a lot of people. First of all, the certification criteria was developed in partnership with our What Work Cities partners, right? They are experts in data governance, data management, in procurement, in evaluation. Our RFA colleagues are experts in change management and commitment to this work. And so it was really important for us to work with our existing partners to identify what are not just leading practices, but achievable practices, right? Because there's this delicate balance of like wanting to set a standard, but also making sure that cities are equipped to be able to work on it. And so we started with our What Work Cities partners, and then we went to a much broader network of people. We have our What Work Cities Certification Standard Committee, about 12 to 15 individuals that either have worked in local government or worked alongside local government. So we have former mayors on it, we have former city leader, a former chief data officer, we have a representative from the National League of Cities, and other organizations that have worked very closely with city government across city governments in general. And they help us inform kind of what we are evaluating and how we're evaluating. They're an incredible, committee. They push us to think about, is this achievable? Can all cities do this? They also help us identify where there are gaps, right? Like how are we thinking about equity? How are we thinking about resident empowerment and engagement in the certification program? And so they are a really, really important and very essential component of how we build and how we built our certification program. The certification criteria, we revisit every 3 years. The field is moving quickly. There are new things that are coming up, new practices, and some outdated ones. And so we, on an every 3-year basis, will convene not only our standard committee, but our partners, but also our city network to get a really good sense of like, what are we missing? How is the field changed? How has your work changed that can inform what the certification could look like? Early last year, we shared through our kind of communications outlet a survey. We asked our city leaders, like, we're at our 3-year mark. Tell us what you think we should be evaluating. What are new and upcoming? Like, what are you thinking about? What do you want to work on? And what do you feel like? How do you think the field is changing? And so we want to make sure that we are responsive to kind of the shifts in this work, and as the field continues to grow, certification and the certification criteria will adequately reflect kind of the work that local government leaders are doing. and at the same time continue to push them to do what we know is what we'd like to see government do. And so, and we've talked about this a lot, Chris, repurposing is hard. Identifying programs that are not working and then having the political will and the internal data infrastructure to then shift funds from programs that don't work to programs that do, all while thinking about how you're engaging residents through that process is not easy. But at the same time, we know how important it is for city leaders to be thinking about not turning off programs and not telling their residents that they've decided to close this library program that was benefiting, X number of residents. And so we want to continue to kind of, make sure that we have that balance of like providing criteria that is achievable and is reflecting what city leaders should be doing. And at the same time, explore what we think the field is moving towards and how local government leaders can move towards that as well.
It's super exciting, and imagining what city leaders can become, what cities can look like if they master these skill sets. What can happen if you get good at repurposing? The implications are awesome, and that's what we have been so proud of, how communities who begin to demonstrate repurposing fit in with your criteria, because we're like, this is aspirational. This is the direction that we want you to start to head, and tremendous things can unfold with that skill set when you begin to master it. Jen, I was curious, we have, for example, Duluth, Minnesota is on the call. Jen Carlson, we might have met at GFOA when we were all in LA a couple of years ago now. But is it open to everybody, every city, or are there some thresholds? And maybe related, I know the criteria is publicly made available, so anybody could just go download it and take a look at it and attempt to understand what you're trying to assess. But I was just kind of curious, could a Duluth or others who are going to tune in later from our community take part?
Yeah, I would encourage all cities to go through the assessment, right? Because the true value is just having someone else take a look at what your practices are and say, here are some opportunities for you to move, and here are some things that you're really doing well. We work currently with cities above 30,000 in population within the United States. And so, unfortunately, we're not working with international cities, nor with kind of the much smaller cities that are under 30,000 yet. But again, to your point, the criteria is available online. So is the assessment tool. So we encourage all city leaders to look at the criteria, actually go through the assessment, and figure out kind of what are the next steps that you can take, how you compare to peer cities, and what are the resources that you can access, because you have a better understanding of kind of what your city can do and where your data practices currently exist.
Yeah, it's very cool. Well, thanks for sharing some of the background as well. I know there's a question that we'll get to more about the future, but I was just kind of curious, do you have anything that you could share about the future of the certification program? Like I'm imagining once somebody is certified, where do they go? Where do they go next? What's their next bar to leap over?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned, I want all eligible cities to be on the path towards certification. And I think it's about 1,400 cities that can actually submit an assessment and start working with us directly to be certified. In general, the program is expanding this much larger movement of cities that are committed to building a data-driven and well-managed government, and more importantly, a government that works for residents. So just going through the assessment itself is kind of the first step that cities can take. But when I think about the continued growth of the certification program, the more cities, the more we can work with cities, the more we'll know how to better support them, and the more resources and programming and benefits we can provide to not only the cities that have achieved certification, but also the cities that are on the path to being certified. And so broadening that movement and building that bigger community that are all kind of working towards this together is one thing that I hope to see in the next few years of certification. I also want it to be the measure of good government. Like, I want people who are not, city wonks or city employees to understand the importance of what certification means and why their city was able to achieve it, or why their city's spending time to get certified. It is, when we built the program, we looked at models like B Corp and Star Communities, and any kind of seal or award that is given to entities. And we know it's really important that residents, business leaders, community partners all kind of understand that this seal of approval is that this city has done a lot of work around data, and we're starting to see outcomes come out of it, and it really is making government more effective and a better place for residents to live. And so building that ecosystem where others understand the importance and the value of certification and why cities are trying to achieve it is something that I hope for the program in the next few years.
That's awesome. Man, it's so exciting talking with you. I want to shift gears just ever so slightly into some budget talk. We happen to work with a community who wants to be data-driven, like you encourage them to be, but especially around the decision-making process around resources. We're totally excited about the current initiative that you have around budgeting for equity and recovery, and would love to hear more about what that program entails. What was the impetus for that program, and what do you hope that cities achieve?
Sure. You know how much I love also talking about budgeting and kind of the very important connection between data and budgets. The pandemic hit, and we had some assumptions of kind of what and how it would impact cities, but we really didn't know to what extent. But as we started to think about and provide programming for cities, we realized that cities are expecting huge budget shortfalls between last year and 2022, and approximately, I think, $125 billion in revenue losses last year. And we also know that the pandemic has very much disproportionately impacted BIPOC communities, and equity-driven budget decisions is essential and in the long run, but very much important in the decisions that are going to be happening within city government and within budget and finance offices in the next few months. And so that is the impetus for this new program. Bloomberg Philanthropies launched it a few months ago. It is within the What Works Cities initiative, and it's focused on providing city municipal finance leaders an opportunity to learn from not only one another, but financial experts, and really solve problems with a network of peers. We want them to share ideas and solutions on very pressing fiscal challenges, and then also receive implementation and technical assistance support from expert partners who can help them think about challenges both on their expenditure side, but also revenue, their capital investment, and most importantly, how cities are thinking about bringing residents into that conversation and the equity implications that these budget decisions have, both in the short term and the long term. And so we are convening chief financial officers and budget directors from 29 cities. And they're engaging with us on a monthly virtual session where they learn directly from experts and also connect with their peers as they're thinking about the problem they're trying to solve for and the support that they'll receive from our expert partners and the solutions that they get to test. Over the course of the program, all of the cities will select one short-term and one long-term fiscal and equity goals. And as you probably know, one will be probably most pressing, like we need to make sure we get this done in the next 6 months. And the other is really focused on like the systems and structural changes that budget and finance leaders want to see, especially incorporating equity into something as important as your annual budget process. And so our primary focus of the program is to incorporate equity principles and resident engagement strategy into these budgeting and financial systems. And we want to make sure we build the capacity of the fiscal leaders who are leading this work to be champions of equity in all that they oversee. It's exciting. It's also the first time that What Works Cities really has the opportunity to engage, budget and finance leaders in this really meaningful way. And we are really excited for the impact that they will have in their cities as they're thinking differently about how the budget and finance offices can play a more significant role in driving equity goals and also resident engagement strategies for the city.
We have talked a lot about this, and it's so exciting and interesting. As we've talked about, there's decision making, there's policy making that obviously has an impact on residents. There's administrating local government, and then it seemed that your work naturally led you to down the hall to the budget office to find out like where does that come into play, and that there are tremendous implications of how resources are allocated in order to achieve these outcomes, equity notwithstanding. And I would love to hear a little bit more about your interest in budget. Well, I could stop there. Just here you have the channeling resources.
I mean, we talk about how important it is to fund programs that work, right? And that meets the needs of residents. There are new ideas, new projects, new solutions that come across city leaders' desks on a regular basis. But the big question is, how are they going to fund it, and how are they going to staff it to be able to even pilot and test if this is going to work and make a difference in their cities? So the budgeting process in general is, we've talked a lot about budget being a value statement. It really is a value statement, but it also is how you build a culture of risk-taking and innovation and data-driven decision-making is if you adequately fund these programs and provide the opportunities to bring data and evaluation results and analysis into kind of that decision-making process within the budget. And so I think it's been exciting to see some cities take a lead on this, right? We both work with Tulsa, Oklahoma, and kind of the evolution of their performance work, their data work, how they're thinking about evaluation, all now being tied directly because of the individuals that lead this work within Tulsa, tied directly around their financial model and also their budgeting processes. It's not easy, right? Like it's, you know this better than we do. It's difficult to start thinking about non-traditional models for how you can think about budget processes. But I think this is exciting for us because data plays such an important component to it. And how you think about collecting, analyzing data, tying evaluation results to funding decisions is really kind of the evolution that we've had over the last couple of years in the work that we've done with cities, and also have seen city government take the lead on it by bringing either the offices together or kind of thinking about how performance and data evaluation officers are working hand in hand with their counterparts in the budget and finance offices.
Oh man. And I'm drawing on a recent conversation that we had, but I love seeing how you're working your way on the path, on the journey that you're on. And then, we've come at it from we started at a different starting place, but we have met very much in Tulsa at something that's really profound. And it's when you talk about funding decisions, it's funding decisions about what? And we have discovered, much like you, that at least one interesting pathway is understanding funding decisions at a program level. Programs, services, when we talk about what's working and what's not working, talking about that at a programmatic or service level is liberating. It creates a common understanding, so we know what that decision-making unit is. Maybe a different way to put it is we both work with passionate leaders who are talking about equity, and they have this great vision of what equitable resource allocation could look like, about what citizen engaged, even participatory budgeting could look like. And when it all comes back to a resource decision, things have the potential, there's risk in that translation all the way back to fund accounting and line items and a bunch of stuff that's like, wait a second, I thought we were talking about equity. Well, we are, but there needs to be some translation of how all the resources are managed to that ultimate goal that you're trying to achieve. I'm curious about your insights and your path around program and service level data.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think you're right? Like, and we should acknowledge that budget and budget processes are difficult for those that are participating and those that are running it. And we're not going to see overnight someone go from line item budgeting to program budgeting, right? But I think it's important to think about, like, what are we funding, and like what and who is that benefiting, right? And those are two big questions that, regardless of what you end up doing, zero-based budgeting, priority-based budgeting, because I think every city has to figure out what's right for them and what works best for, you know, their employees and their staff and their residents. But it's important to think about who ultimately are these programs benefiting, and more importantly, how are we funding these programs that ultimately are impactful and have evidence behind it that it is actually changing lives, right? And so that, you know, some of it is just tying your budgeting process to strategic goals. And we've seen quite a few cities do that, right? It's changing your budget template and your budget request memos to incorporate your citywide or enterprise strategic goal and say, like, we are now funding this is helping us work towards this goal. You know, that's one step in actually thinking about how it ties directly to kind of the overall plan that the city has that is responsive to what we know and what cities know they need to provide for their residents. Also, you know, we're in a place where strategic goals and priorities are cross-departmental and require many people to come to the table, both within government and outside of government. And so being able to leverage data and evaluation and think about program decisions versus line item decisions is one way. Like, you can ensure that everyone is at the table to have these discussions around funding and like the sustainable model for how an effective program can actually be scaled within city government so that more and more residents can benefit from the services that program or service is providing. So I think, as you know, our data work has shown the importance of breaking down silos and building this culture. And it's the same thing we're hoping to see from our financial officers and budget directors in the new program, is that they are also breaking down kind of the silos and building this culture where everyone is focused on what's working, you know, where are there opportunities to really fund programs that are benefiting residents, that residents are engaged with, that is equitable, and then how do they continue to build the systems and structures that allow for that very equity informed, resident informed approach to funding.
I'm gonna try to tie some things together, and then I also want to give you a final chance to cover anything that we have not covered. And if there are any questions as well, please, for our listeners who are here with us in the live studio audience, please feel free to use the chat if you have questions along the way. But Jen, you started with where you came from and this idea of systems, of understanding how to impact systems and systems thinking. And it occurs to me through where you started with data-driven decision-making, the path to certification, certifying and recognizing certain skill sets in collecting, analyzing, and applying data to decision-making, all the way to how you've anticipated what's likely going to hit a lot of cities in the next 6 months, and the approach to decision-making that you can inspire and encourage and create a network of people who learn from one another. You're creating a way that things work, that you can imagine as you look towards the future. If we can master how the system works now, then it doesn't matter if the challenge in the next 2 years is still equity or something else. Talk about homelessness earlier. That we have learned how to tackle these wicked problems, and we can apply the same principles to address those problems. And I just wanted to start there is how I see the tapestry kind of emerging from all of your work, and at the same time recognizing I'm an amateur at looking at this artistry that you're building. What does the future look like? Unveil for us, where is all this headed? What's the future of data-driven government?
Oh, so it's exciting what the future has, right? And what the future could look like for data-driven governance. There are a few things. I think the pandemic, the racial reckoning has forced us in a good way to rethink and look at the systems and structures that we have built and how we can re-engineer them so that they are more equitable and that they are more resident focused. And that's where, and data plays such an important role in that, right? Data, along with other tools and resources, can provide a much larger picture of kind of the work and the value that city leaders bring to the overall success of and long-term success of the programs and services that they provide to residents. And so there will continually, like, I hope that cities will continue to build that capacity and the skills that are required to change culture and think about how, you know, and that model of like breaking down silos and building cultures, to your point, Chris, can be applied to so many other situations. Once we start to break down the infrastructure and like break down the silos and start having conversations that focus on who do we want to serve, how do we want these programs to really benefit the people who need it most, whether it's budgeting, whether it's data governance, whether it's evaluation practices, it's the same capacity skills that are necessary. And that, I think, is the most exciting component about What Works Cities, and also the most exciting thing to look forward to, is the ability for data to allow folks to start to ask the right questions, rethink and bring new ideas to the table and new partners to the table to be able to solve and continue to solve what may come up down the line in the future as pressing challenges that cities will be equipped to be able to handle.
I'm inspired. I mean, I want to start mastering the skills right now. Seriously, it is inspiring. It's empowering is the word I was looking for, that you can do it. And it's not just a one-off, like you can learn to tackle and improve your approach to equity. We can equip ourselves to re-engineer systems, to innovate. There are skills that you can learn and you can master and you can get good at this. And that's probably what's, to me, most enticing about the value proposition of the work and What Works Cities. And we're big fans. This is truly wonderful.
I have to make a plug for this work, right? Like as I mentioned, I want every city to reach out to us and say, like, how can we work with you? I want, all of our cities to be on the What Works Cities Academy and have access to the courses and trainings that are provided by our expert partners. I think we have so many great examples of cities that have done incredible work. And so being a part of our network, even something as simple as like signing up for our newsletter, you'll get to access the great stories, the great tools, the tactics that city leaders are trying and have succeeded. And you'll also have access to the resources and tools that our very large network of experts are providing in support of data-driven decision-making, but more importantly, to ensure that city leaders are equipped with everything that they need to be able to either start their journey or continue to progress on this data-driven decision-making journey.
Oh, this is wonderful. Is it as simple as signing up for the newsletter? When we send out this recording to our community, can we just include your email for outreach, or is that
yes
appropriate?
and yes? We'll send you all the links so that you can stay connected with What Works Cities in the future.
Wonderful. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I missed? I know we're wrapping up. We had favorite book.
I just want to say again, thank you for doing this. I think you all are bringing a lot of wonderful learnings and insights from local leaders to experts to generalists to the table. And there's just a lot of learnings that I'm taking away from our conversation, and I hope that others are taking away as well. So thank you for hosting this and for inviting us and being a longtime partner to What Works Cities.
It's an honor of our work, and we're grateful to you. Jen Park, thank you very much. We will be distributing this to our community, both in video form as well as the podcast form as well. And to everybody who's listening, thanks for sticking with us today. We did have some comments in the chat. Jen, if you had a chance to see those, thank you, Marcy and Jen Carlson. Marcy's from Sandy, Utah, by the way. And for all of you who are listening to the recording, thanks for spending the time with us. So we'll have another exchange coming up. I believe our next guest is Jamie Ludovic from Washington County, Wisconsin. And that will be extremely exciting. But thank you again, Jen. It's been total pleasure for the last hour, and I think we'll wrap it up.
Thank you.